Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Oh my gosh, we're almost done. So, this is week 12 of 13. As you see on the screen right now, the first thing that I'd like you to do is please take about 10 minutes or so and take out your phone, snap the QR code for you, either the BA side or the BMIS side, and complete this very short official university CFQ, the course feedback questionnaire. Your feedback is really important when we look at the program that we have at the Academy of Music in general, and getting data from every one of our students to try to improve the program overall. So don't think that they don't matter. They rarely do. So please take a few minutes here right now as you're watching this. Just take out your phone and snap a photo. Put this video on pause if you like. All right, did you do it? Did you do it? All right, I hope you did. So thank you so much for your help with the questionnaires. And in fact, when you have a chance, please do the same thing for all your other courses. This is very, very helpful, as I mentioned before. Okay, so onwards to our second to last chapter for this semester. And in preparation, you have already done the Know It video. There was only one Know It video, and then also the Inquisitive. For the online activities that we're doing in lieu of lecture, I am doing a very quick overview here with a short presentation on 6/4 chords. And then I am putting together a Kahoot, an asynchronous Kahoot that you can do on your own. We're also going to recommend that you do a few exercises from the workbook, and then I will also have a video that explains the exercises very much the same way as I've done with the tutorial. But since this is in lieu of the lecture, just a little bit of voice leading and realizing Roman numerals using 6/4 chords in the context of the lecture, just like what we do in LT2 on campus. Okay, so let's get right into it, right? So we're talking about other 6/4 chords. Please remember that 6/4 chords are dissonant because they include a dissonant fourth in the bass, right? Because of this, they are used to embellish other chords. The key word here is that it is used to embellish chords, right? And so they're used to embellish other more stable harmonies. And you can hear in the examples in the book, the very, very first example, 23.1, here it is. The first chord is a root position chord. The second and third chord are the same notes of the chord, but in 6/4 position. I know it still sounds fine. It sounds great. It doesn't nothing wrong with it. But try to sort of step in the shoes of the common practice composers whom we've been looking at and studying all semester, and thinking about how they're thinking about harmony. And you can hear, in fact, especially the last one, there's a little bit more instability. So that's the first one, root position. You can hear the fourth. Now this one really sounds like a cadential 6/4, right? So the first point that we're making here is that in 4-part harmony work, since 6/4 chords are dissonant, please do not use them interchangeably with their first inversion or root position counterpart. Okay, and that's why throughout this whole thing we've been looking at labeling 6/4 chords. The only ones that we've labeled so far is the cadential 6/4, but we're also now moving into other ways we can label and sort of explain the phenomenon of how the 6/4 chords are used. Okay, so as I mentioned, and also as the book mentioned, as you know already, there are 4 different types of 6/4 chords that we can label and think about it this way. They are pedal, passing, arpeggiated, and cadential. Cadential we already know, that's the cadential 6/4. And we're going to talk about a few other ones. Now, the cool thing about some of these, especially the pedal and the passing, is that, remember, we have been talking about functional harmony this whole time. So we're talking about how we are progressing from subdominant to dominant to tonic, always in that direction, and never from dominant to subdominant, right? However, since these are dissonant chords that are actually not very functional, they're not behaving with the same function, right? So this is in a similar way of thinking about harmony as what we've talked about last week in sequences, also non-functional, right, based on a pattern, etc. These are embellishment chords. So in some of these situations, you're going to see a 5 chord going to a 2 chord, for example, because it's part of a pedal, 6/4, 2/6/4. Or you might have a 5 chord going into a 4/6/4, for example. Sort of strange things like that, right? So as we're ending the semester, we're looking at examples of non-functional harmony. Other 6/4 chords, dissonant 6/4 chords, is an example of that. Let's start with just a very quick review of the pedal 6/4. The pedal 6/4 is highlighted by neighbor motion. Now, we've seen this neighbor motion when we're looking at the 1/4/1 chord progression, when 4 is used to embellish 1, right? So this is a similar idea. This is the pedal 6/4, and this is what it sounds like. Right, so it's a root position chord where the same bass note comes before and after the pedal 6/4. In the middle, inside that sandwich, that note is held as a pedal. Okay, and pedal just means a repeated same note, usually in the bass. And the word comes in part from what you would do generally in an organ. The organ has different manuals, but the feet are also playing pedals, also like a keyboard. If you have never seen an actual pipe organ console, Google the images. It's really neat what they do with their feet. And so a lot of those held notes, especially towards the end of a piece, in the coda section, you'll have the organist holding a pedal on just the tonic usually, or the dominant or the tonic. And with that pedal, it creates different types of dissonances with everything happening on top. And so from that idea, we're also calling a held note in the bottom a pedal that causes a 6/4 chord, a pedal 6/4, right? Note that the difference between the pedal and the cadential 6/4, we'll talk about differences throughout today, right? So the cadential 6/4 comes before but not after 5, right? So you can't start with 5 and then go into a cadential 6/4 because it's supposed to be sort of an intermediary chord before you go to 5. And so if you sort of start with 5, then the effect is sort of lost. However, in pedal, a pedal 6/4, the 5 can come before or after, right? The cadential 6/4, the chord here is the actual 6/4 chord is metrically accented. It's supposed to be on a strong beat, stronger than the second beat, whereas the pedal 6/4 is usually metrically weak, in the weaker position. In the cadential 6/4, the bass is almost always doubled. In the pedal 6/4, the bass is usually doubled. This, generally you'll see a similarity between the two. So let's hear these two. This is the first one is the cadential 6/4. The second one is the pedal 6/4. You can really hear the sort of weak metric place for that difference between the cadential 6/4 and the pedal 6/4. In fact, the cadential 6/4 is much more functional, right? It really functions as a movement towards dominant. In fact, a decoration of the dominant. The second example that we're talking about is the passing 6/4. A passing 6/4 is a second inversion triad whose bass is a passing tone. In 4-part harmony, the bass of a passing 6/4 is usually doubled. And so the passing tone G here in the bass, F, G, A, supports this 1/6/4 chord, literally a 1/6/4 chord. C, E, G is the chord with G in the bass. And so this, generally, the G is doubled. And you can see this, we've seen this motion as well, right? It's just, we haven't seen it with using the 6/4 chords. Passing motion, we've seen harmonizing do, re, mi in the bass, right? So the re could be possibly 7 diminished 6, for example, and different things, right? So we're just using one more, chord that can be used as a passing 6/4 chord to decorate that 4 harmony, to move from 4 to 4/6, right? And in this example, the Jose Silvestre White Zamacueca, let's listen to it first. Right, so notice that I added some arrows here to highlight the voice exchange, the really beautiful voice exchange here between the bass and the soprano, right? So this is made possible by this passing 6/4 chord. Now notice also that we're going from a 5 chord to a 2 chord to a 5 chord, right? So in generally, I wouldn't say that this is very stylistic from 5 to 2 functionally. However, remember, we're not in a function part of what we're talking about here in this harmony, right? This is not functional. This is embellishment. So these are chords that are embellishing. They're dissonant chords that are embellishing a certain harmony. In fact, the composer here is using the 6/4 chord here to change positions, right, from root position to first inversion. Let's hear it again. Right, and so the final new 6/4 chord type is the arpeggiated 6/4. The arpeggiated 6/4 arises when a chord is sustained in the upper voices, as the bass voice either arpeggiates the entire triad or oscillates between the root and the fifth of the chord. Arpeggiated 6/4 chords are found mostly in instrumental genres rather than in 4-part chorale settings. And for me, the arpeggiated 6/4 really is just for completeness, right? So these are sort of 6/4 chords that happen to be there because we are arpeggiating the bass to show all the different notes of the triad, for example. But again, not functional. It's not meant to be something that needs to resolve, for example, like the cadential 6/4. Here is the example. This is Fromental Halavi Overture to La Juive. Right, you've heard this before. It's just a way of extending that tonic chord, especially in a piano piece, for example, an instrumental piece. Okay, so the final slide I have here is a very good one because it sort of summarizes all of the different types. Just to show you, right? So the cadential 6/4 we've talked about, metrically accented, leads directly to 5 root position, does not follow 5, right? So we have to go straight to the cadential 6/4 and then to 5, also known as 1/6/4/5, also known as 1C5, for example. Pedal 6/4 is formed by a passing tone and or neighbor tone above a stationary bass. So if it's a 6/4 chord that's caused by a held pedal in the bass, then that's a pedal 6/4. The passing 6/4, it's a passing motion in the bass, right? Formed by a 6/4 chord above a passing tone, right? Between two harmonies. And then finally, the arpeggiated 6/4 is formed by a chordal skip in the bass, right? So because I'm arpeggiating through the chord, do, so, mi, do, for example, once I land on sol, it technically is a 6/4 chord, right? But to explain that, we're just saying, hey, this is part of an arpeggio. This is just arpeggiated 6/4 chord. Let's hear all of them together. And then now the pedal 6/4, the passing 6/4, finally the arpeggiated 6/4. Right, excellent. So the next thing I'd like you to try out is head on over to your digital workbook. So we're going to start with going through 23B1 and 23B2. I have posted the answer key, model answers, and also a worksheet if you want to print out or use on your iPad or PDF version of it to use on your iPad if you'd like. And then I will also, the next video in this series of videos, I will explain how to move through the exercise. You're welcome to try it first and then look at the video, or take a look at the video first and then try it, whatever you like. These are resources for you, okay? So that's what we're going on to next.